So have you ever had any difficulty putting something into words? You're at something you're like having trouble communicating. When people do have trouble communicating, it's not the simple things. It's not like how to put together a table, although it can be hard to write instructions for that. IKEA has mastered that pretty well. It's usually like the more profound things where we resort to music or poetry for things like love or anger. There's something inside of us that's it's very difficult to take that out and hand it to other people in a way that they're going to get what's really going on in our head. And sometimes it's the complicated things too. That's why, and it took me into my middle years to realize this, but that's why professional jargon is important, because that's the way two people with deep knowledge can communicate it with each other accurately. You can't just sort of like generally describe what's going on. You need to have those specific words for everything. So imagine John. Remember, we're going through the four Gospels written by a Jew, a teenager, a scientist, and a mystic. So now we're on John, the mystic, and he's stuck trying to tell the story of Jesus. John lived with Jesus for 3 years. He saw all that Jesus did. In fact, John was part of Jesus' inner circle. John was one of the ones Jesus chose to go away with him when he went off to solitude. John was there at the Mount of the Transfiguration, where Jesus was transfigured he became whiter than any bleacher could ever make clothes, and Moses and Elijah appeared with him talking on the mountain. John experienced all this. He experienced his death and his resurrection. John took care of Jesus' mother after Jesus died. Do you remember? Imagine the conversations that must have gone on between John and Jesus' mother about who Jesus was and what he did. And this is the last gospel written, the last of the gospel stories. So you can imagine John has heard all the other gospels, and maybe he's thinking, I don't know, I don't want to put words in his mouth or thoughts in his head, but I do. It's kind of interesting that he takes a totally different way of helping us get at who Jesus is and what he did in our lives. Maybe he read those other stories and he said they're accurate, but they're not big enough. They're not big enough. Kind of like the video we watched. If we just sit here in the room and we don't really every once in a while think about the universe, we probably aren't thinking big enough. And so maybe John thought, it's just not big enough. So he's thinking, John's sitting down and he's thinking, just imagine he's gone through all this and he's thinking, where do I begin? Maybe he's already seen what Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote. Probably not, but possibly. And Matthew started with the genealogy because it's about the messianic prophecy through the children of Abraham. And Mark skipped the whole thing altogether because he just wanted to get straight to the action. Luke carefully researched everything, and he began by telling the story about the announcement with the angels. And then John sits down and he says, how should I start this thing? Where would you start the story of Jesus? How would you try to convey what you believe about Jesus? Well, here's what John did. He wrote, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And in him was life, and that life was the light of men. I look at this and I think John is not going to let us get away with thinking that we understand God. I think we can see what God wants to communicate to us through Jesus Christ, but John is not going to let us get away with thinking we actually understand who God is or God's existence or really even in a way Jesus. He uses this word. He used the word word. Most of you have heard this before, that word is logos in Greek. And you look it up, it says it's a messages thing, It's the core kind of matter of it. It's even used for the reports, the thing that proclaims what is about something else. And so he's trying to figure out how to convey Jesus. And he says, okay, so there's this entity, which he calls the Word, which somehow expresses exactly who God is, but this Word is God, but the Word is also with God. And this is the point where some people say, well, why would you believe that? That's nonsense. And that's part of the reason why I showed the movie, because it's important for us who believe we have received Word from God in Jesus Christ to remember how much that we don't understand about life, the universe, and everything. We don't understand gravity. We have mathematical models for gravity, but we don't understand exactly how it works, how light works. Existence, consciousness, love. These are things, our existence is bathed in things that we don't understand. And so the idea that we would be able to intellectually comprehend the God who created all this stuff that we can't seem to get a handle on, well, I think it makes more sense that we can't understand God, and that John would have to resort to words like this and phrases like this than if he could. And so one of the things I think John helps us do, and this is a good Advent thought. This is a good Advent thought, because Advent is supposed to be preparing to sit at the manger, preparing to kneel before the newborn Christ child. And so this is a good Advent thought, because a lot of times we tend to sort of just anthropomorphize everything. We sort of humanize everything and put it in small kind of human terms. And there's the Father and the Son, and we don't think too hard about that, because, well, we don't understand it actually. So we sort of picture a dad and his grown son, and the dad telling the grown son, you need to go to earth to save those people, and the grown son saying, okay. But that's small. That's little. That's not God universe size. That's us trying to squeeze God, the incomprehensible God, into our mind. And then I know we have to walk within the boundaries of our mind, but if we don't every once in a while let our mind be a little bit blown by what John is really asserting here, we're going to end up with some sort of flat religion of the rules, instead of a religion that so slowly pries open our mind to who God is and what His will is for our life each day as we walk through it. So John 1:1-4, this word. All things were created, and life and light came through Him. John lived in dark times. And this is important to know, because this is probably part of the reason John chose the metaphor of light. John lived in dark times. He's probably writing about 80 AD, and he walked, when John was with Jesus in like 30, 31, 32 AD, it was a time of relative peace. There were insurrections and things, but generally speaking, the Romans had a handle on things. But a little later, things got really out of hand, and the Jews revolted quite seriously. And in 70 AD, Jerusalem was surrounded and sieged, and hundreds of thousands of people died. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish people died. And then the Roman army finally got in, and they razed the temple. They completely conquered the city and the Jewish nation. They took tens of thousands of Jewish people to be sold into Roman slavery. So this is the time that John is writing in. So when he writes about darkness and light, he's got a lot of, if you can go to a place where you can think of some of the horrible things that have happened to you, some of the very difficult and painful things, that's going on in John. All of his Jewish brothers and sisters have been flooding the Roman slave markets. Two people dear to John, Peter and Paul, were probably both killed within a few years before John writes this. And John himself is probably in exile. So John is writing about darkness and light, and he knows dark times like none of us know dark times. And this is what he writes about the dark night. And you can almost feel the warmth inside of him in the middle of the coldness of the world in which he lives and the pain and the difficulty. He writes, the light shines in the darkness. And the darkness has not overcome it. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. What kind of darkness do you live in? I know for me, just the way I'm made, I guess, the darkness of the utter incomprehensibility of our existence kind of weighs down on me. But a lot of people don't walk around with like that kind of stuff going on. God bless you, I wish I was that way. Really. But we all have darkness in our life. What kind of darkness? The future's always dark, and for some of us, the future feels kind of dark right now. Some of us live in that darkness of what is life really about. Some of us, at different times, are acutely aware of the darkness that lives inside of ourselves, the dark thing that comes up to say those things or feel those things about other people or look down on other people. We have this darkness that kind of whirls around inside of us. Some of us live with the darkness of pain or sickness or chronic and ongoing conditions. And that's a kind of a darkness. Just knowing that you're never going to get up, we're never going to wake up without that pain again in this life. That's a kind of a darkness. And then, of course, we personally have the darkness of death hanging over each one of us. And most of us in this room have experienced that darkness of death of loved ones. Of people who you wish you could hug one more time or say one more word to or somehow connect with one more time, but you know you can't. You know that you cannot in this life connect with them again. John tells us that the world, life, has a darkness to it, but the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The light shines into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So he continues on to tell us a little bit more. We get a little preamble here. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming in the world. And the point there, the one thing that the most important word on that little paragraph is everyone. Everyone. All the way back to Abraham. God told Abraham, you're going to be a blessing to all nations, not just your descendants. And then Jesus comes in and he's willing to talk to Samaritans and women. And he walks up and he touches diseased and crippled people. Jesus shatters all the social boundaries that we put up. That's the everyone. The light of Jesus is light for everyone. And that is who John says was coming into the world as he moves through this preamble. And then he tells us what we need to remember as we watch that video that made our knees knock about the tininess of our life in the middle of the universe. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were not born, not of blood, not of the will of the flesh, nor of man, but of God. The Maker came to what he made, and nobody recognized him. Imagine going on a long trip and coming home, and you're all, you're disheveled. You don't look. You went away in your best clothes and everything, but it was a rough trip. And you came back, and all you had was the clothes on your back, and if you're a guy, you hadn't shaved in weeks. Maybe if you're a girl, you haven't shaved in weeks too. Whatever. however you want to think about it, you're barely recognizable. And you walk in your own front door, and nobody recognizes you. You walk in the house that you bought and paid for your whole family, and no one even recognizes you. That's what happened to Jesus. But not only that, you go home and nobody is acting the way you raised them to act. Nobody is following the principles that you tried to hand down. Nobody is being kind. Nobody is sharing. Nobody is looking out for anybody else. Everybody's looking out for themselves. There's people, a couple of the people who live in your house are sitting in the corner and they're starving while some other people are sitting at the kitchen table gorging themselves. That's what Jesus came to. And imagine if you came in and you said, listen, everybody, this is not how I raised you. This is not what this house is about. This is not what this family is about. And we really need to change this. And imagine if they all, as one, rose up and threw you out the front door and locked it. That's what they did to Jesus. That which he made. He came to his own, and they did not receive him. But instead they crucified him. But to all who will receive him, he gives the right to become children of God. Born not of blood, or the will of flesh, or the will of man, but of God. And how does he do this? Now we get to Christmas. This is the sentence that this, as much as the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were made through the Word, as much as that should really cause you to burst a few blood vessels in your head, this is the one that should really make your knees knock and say, I really don't understand anything. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The creator of the universe becomes a creation. If I had a mic, I'd drop it. This light of the world, this Word of God, the thing that expresses, that is the core idea of who God is, takes on human flesh. And that's what we celebrate. Something bigger than everything we just saw in the video somehow comes into human form as a baby, sitting in a manger. You can't think about it. It's not really something to be explained. And this is really, I think, part of what John was getting at. This is something to let wash over you, not to try to explain, because it's beyond us. But Jesus reveals God to us. And what does Jesus show us? That God is like, well, that's the only Son from the Father. One of the ways to look at that is the Son is the image of the Father, right? Like you're a chip off the old block. So the Son is the one who reveals us the Father. And what do we find out about God? What do we find out about the God who created everything we saw in that video? That God is full of grace and truth, because that's what Jesus reveals to us. He's full of grace and truth. John bore witness to him and cried out, "This is he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before him, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." Grace and truth. No one has ever seen God. The only God, that's a reference to Jesus. Again, we get the incomprehensible nature of what will one day, hundreds of years later, be fleshed out as the Trinity. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side has made him known. And what has he made known? Grace and truth. So stare at the baby. Stare at the little baby in the nativity. God says he's revealing himself. The creator of the universe says he's revealing himself to us in that little baby. And it's good news that God is full of grace and truth, because that's what we need. More than anything else, grace and truth are what we need to grow. We do not grow without truth. We need truth. It's not always pleasant, it's not always fun, it's not always easy, but it is necessary. We need truth. But thank God we also get grace with the truth, because it's grace that enables us to face into the truth, to walk into the truth, to walk into the truth of the darkness that lives inside of us, to face, look in the mirror honestly, because we know when we look in the mirror and we slowly, as we grow mature, we are able to look more and more honestly in the mirror. We know that we're not just going to get truth as God guides us and opens us up. We're going to get grace as well. Grace frees us from the shackles of the past. Grace frees us from worrying about the future. John says, the maker of the universe visited his creation to reveal himself to us. And what does he show us? Grace and truth. And what are you going to do with the grace and the truth that this baby, whose birth we're going to celebrate, what are you going to do with the grace and the truth that Jesus brings? What are you going to do with it? Does something weigh on you? Are you